Hello, welcome to week 10 of Communication Studies. This week we're going to talk about public speaking, public communication. The heart of communications is the study of rhetoric, and rhetoric is the art of designing public messages that can change the way in which audiences think or feel about political issues. So, in order to influence what people think and feel about political issues, we have to move from the private sphere where we communicate solely with our own interest in mind, kind of one-to-one, face-to-face conversation, into the public sphere where we communicate with the members of a community in mind. We're operating in a larger group than just our private world. We're trying to influence the public opinion or the public view or a church-wide view, or it's beyond interpersonal, and now it becomes public communication, so it moves into the public sphere. There are 6 social functions of rhetoric. And if I were to ask you a question, perhaps a test question that said something like, why is public communication important? These 6 factors would be the correct answer to that question. So you will want to pay attention to these. They matter. These are the 6 functions of rhetoric. First of all, discovering facts. That's an important aspect of rhetoric. Public speakers are expected to be well informed. That means they have to research their topics, and that process often reveals new information. And they engage in the rhetorical enterprise and help their audience and themselves to find out new things about the world that previously they may not have known. So discovering facts is the first social function of rhetoric. The second social function of rhetoric is testing ideas. Public discourse gives us the opportunity to discuss and test ideas publicly. It's an important and peaceful way to accomplish that. And so the process of putting together a public address, or even a politician may give a speech over several different weeks to several different audiences, begins to adapt and begins to that speech evolves due to audience reaction. And so it gives us an opportunity to test ideas, to reject those things that are illogical and unsupported by the data, and accept things that are right. And part of that's an outgrowth of our research and our discovery of facts, but part of that is an outgrowth of our presentation as we deal with audience members, and as we try to convince them and try to persuade them, and we eventually come to the conclusion that this is either a good idea or a bad idea. The third function of rhetoric is persuasion, persuading others. And the art of rhetoric is one of the most important resources available to groups or individuals engaged in persuasive arguments. It's second only to the merit of the ideas. If the idea is good, if it has merit, if it has value, the most important key element to persuading others of that idea is good rhetoric. And so rhetoric helps us discover facts, it helps us test ideas, and it helps us persuade others. The fourth thing that it does is it shapes knowledge. Once facts have been discovered and presented, and the ideas that derive from them have been tested, and individuals have come to accept those facts as true, then it begins to shape the body of knowledge available to the community. And so, in one sense, truth is not something that's independent of communication, but it's a product of communication. We help people realize what is true. We help people see truth, and we, in our rhetorical presentations, our public speaking efforts, we help others to arrive at the same truth that we've arrived at. Now, from a ministry standpoint, this is the preacher preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ to someone who may not have ever heard that gospel. And the whole point of that message is to persuade them to encounter Jesus Christ, is to persuade them to come to the understanding that I need this gospel. I need this love of God in my life. And if ultimately we're persuading them that this is truth. The only way to be baptized is in the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of sins. That's a persuasive argument, and it is an argument that shapes and defines truth. So if rhetoric is the tool that allows us to establish truth, it is also a tool that allows us to establish communities. It is through public discourse that people come to share like visions of the world. It's a pastor who casts vision to his church that helps a church come together into a cohesive community of believers and with all pulling together towards the same goal with the same end result in mind. All of that comes from a communicated message. And so communication helps us build communities. And many times when we think of that, we think of local communities like a church or like a club or a social group that you may belong to. But by and large, these days, communities are expanding to be international online communities. When you get on Facebook, you join groups of people who are like-minded, who have the same beliefs, who are held together by the same unified belief structure. And it is the communication in that new media that gives us the ability to build those communities. The final thing, the sixth function of rhetoric, is the distribution of power. Knowledge and rhetoric and the ability to speak publicly gives us power. It empowers us personally. It provides the skills that we need for personal success and for career advancement. It empowers us psychologically. It gives us the knowledge to shape the way other people think, and it grants us political power. It gives us a voice to persuade people to our point of view. And that's why communication is so important, and public communication is so important. Why it's so important that everybody learns how to be a good public communicator, because it takes the power out of the hands of others and puts it into your hands. It gives you the ability to persuade. Now, we've all heard good and bad public messages. We've heard preachers we thought were phenomenal, and if we're honest, we've listened to preachers we thought were less than phenomenal. We've heard politicians give rousing speeches that brought people together, and then we've also heard politicians give speeches that just really were not so good. And so we all judge rhetoric. We all judge public speaking. And if we're gonna try to evaluate what good rhetoric is and what bad rhetoric is, or what good communication is and what bad communication, there are three factors that we should use to evaluate a public message. The first is the nature of the context in which the public communication occurs. The second is the relationship between the speaker and audience. And the third is the appeals that occur within the message itself. Let's talk for a minute about context. The context of a public discourse or public communication is contained in three spheres. First of all, there's a physical setting. Then there's the medium or the media that is used to transmit the message. And then there is the occasion. So the physical surrounding is where the speech is given or where the presentation is given. And that context has a dramatic impact on how the message is constructed and delivered. If I was giving a message, if I was asked to preach at General Conference to a room full of like-minded believers and a large percentage of that audience being preachers and pastors and evangelists and missionaries, the way I would structure my message and the way I would deliver my message would be different than if I was asked to preach at a Friday night youth rally to high school, teenage, possibly young career age adults. And so if I was asked to preach in that environment, I would use a little different language choices, a little different word choices, a little different persuasive techniques. The context, the physical setting has an impact on the way I craft my communication. If I'm giving a lecture in a classroom, it's different than preaching before the audience on a Sunday morning from my pulpit. There's just a difference in the context, and it shapes the discourse. Then there's also differences in the way a public address is delivered. Something that is designed for media to be delivered through a YouTube video is different than something that is designed to be delivered in person. And there's the differences are subtle, but they're very important. If I'm communicating through media, as I do with this class, I get absolutely no feedback. I have no idea if you're browsing your phone, or if you're carrying on a conversation with the person beside you, or if you got me turned on 1.5 or 2 times speed, and I sound like Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck or whoever it is. I have no control over that. All I know is that I'm doing my best to communicate without any feedback. But if I was giving the same lecture face to face in a classroom, there's a certain amount of feedback that comes back to me from you, and it helps shape the discussion, helps shape the discourse. It helps me shape the lecture that I'm going to give, and I may even change on the fly and address something that I got a quizzical look about that I don't have that opportunity because of the medium in which the public discourse is communicated. So we worry for the things that we judge on. First of all, our physical setting. Second of all, are the media or the medium. And finally, the occasion. Listen, if occasion matters, the reason why you're speaking matters. And an address, a sermon, or a speech that doesn't match the occasion cannot achieve its purpose.